This video is brought to you by Captivating History. The Hundred Years' War officially lasted from 1337 to 1453, but the 116-year war didn't sound quite as catchy, so historians rounded it down. The Hundred Years' War consisted of a series of campaigns interspersed with periods of peace, and the issues that were ingrained when the war began were not truly resolved until long after the war ended. The seeds of this war were sown in 1066 when William, Duke of Normandy, became King of England. William's great-grandson, Henry Plantagenet, was Duke of Normandy, Aquitaine, and the Count of Anjou when he became the King of England in 1154. Despite this title, he never learned to speak English. As the kings of England were all French, it may appear as though England was under the jurisdiction of France. However, France was a feudal monarchy, which meant the country was divided into separate provinces. Each had a ruler who was supposed to be loyal to the king. Norman dukes gaining power and influence worried the French kings wanted autonomous control. By 1259, Normandy and Anjou were back under French control, but England's kings still ruled Aquitaine and neighboring areas. The English king Henry III and King Louis IX of France signed the Treaty of Paris, which may have been a route to peace for the two countries. Henry and Louis respected each other and were related by marriage, as their wives were sisters. But any amicability between them did not last beyond their reign. The relationship began to break down when Edward I of England invaded Scotland, since France had allied with the Scots. Later, Edward III led an army against the King of Scotland, David II, who was then exiled to France and received by King Philip VI. Subsequently, Philip confiscated Aquitaine from Edward in 1337. The war had begun. In response to the confiscation of French lands, Edward III challenged the legitimacy of Philip VI's claim to the throne. The French and English royals were interlinked, so when Charles IV of France died without an heir in 1328, Edward III had a valid claim to the succession. Despite being only 15 years old, Edward had been crowned King of England the previous year due to his ambitious mother, Isabella. She had successfully deposed her husband, King Edward II, in favor of her son. Isabella was the daughter of the French King Philip IV and the sister of the late Charles IV, so Edward III was put forward as an heir to the French throne. But he was passed over in favor of 35-year-old Philip VI, the cousin of the late king. Edward III tried to invade northern France in 1339, and in 1340 he declared himself the King of France, a title that every English king would assume until 1801. Historians disagree on whether Edward III believed himself to be the ruler of France or if he took the title to stir up trouble. Whatever the truth, Edward used the title as leverage in negotiations with Philip VI. It also enabled him to win the loyalty of discontented French regions, keep the fight on French soil, and render some areas ungovernable by Philip. One bout in 1347 involved Charles of Blois and John Montfort, who both laid claim to the succession of the Duchy of Brittany. Blois was the nephew of King Philip VI, and so Montfort allied with King Edward III to enlist his help. Both kings sent their armies to invade Brittany and confronted each other in December 1342 near Vannes, but a battle was avoided with the Truce of Malatois, signed in January 1343. After this truce, 16 Breton lords were invited to France under the pretense of attending a tournament, where they were then arrested, tried for treason, and beheaded. The head of one of the men, Oliver III of Clisson, was sent back to his home in Nantes and displayed on a pole outside his castle. His widow, Jeanne, was enraged at her husband's execution. She sold off lands, brought 3 warships, and patrolled the English Channel, destroying French vessels, earning her the moniker of Lioness of Brittany. Her ships were known as the Black Fleet, and she sailed the Channel for 13 years, taking delight in personally beheading any French aristocrats she came across. Jeanne undoubtedly aided the English cause during this time, perhaps even helping to supply English troops during their successful military campaign in Crécy. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 was the first big English victory during the Hundred Years' War, and it was shocking that a relatively small English force fighting on foot had been able to defeat the French cavalry, which was thought to be the finest in Europe. After his success, Edward III took his men north to besiege Calais and secure himself a key port. After the fall of Calais, Financial losses and devastation caused by the Black Death resulted in a truce being signed in September 1347. This truce lasted the remainder of Philip VI's life. Upon Philip's death, he was succeeded by his son John II, who kept the treaty's terms. John II was determined to keep the peace, but public opinion turned sour when he allowed the English to keep their French estates without doing homage for them. Conferences held between John II and Edward III in 1353 and 1354 concluded without an agreement, and the truce was over. By 1355, Edward III's heir, Edward the Black Prince, started leading military raids in France, known as chevauchées. In September 1355, he landed in Bordeaux and moved his army southeast to Narbonne, leaving devastation in their wake. In 1356, the Black Prince marched his troops from Bordeaux to the Loire River, and King John II left Normandy with his army to face the threat. The two forces met near Poitiers on Saturday, September 17, 1356, but a truce was made to avoid fighting on a Sunday. On Monday, September 19th, the two sides clashed, with Edward the Black Prince claiming the ultimate victory and capturing King John II along with many of his men. While imprisoned, the French king attempted to draw up terms of peace, but during his incarceration, another claimant to the French throne, Charles of Navarre, also known as Charles the Bad, revolted and tried to seize the throne. Another group, the Estates General, attempted to propose reforms, but were rebuffed by Charles. The situation led to a peasant uprising, which added to the chaos and turmoil. John himself was taken to England and remained there until 1360. During that time, a treaty was drawn up that demanded the English would once again have full sovereignty of Aquitaine and a hefty ransom be paid for the release of King John II. In return for meeting these demands, King Edward III would relinquish his claim on the French throne. However, France delayed in paying the first installments of the ransom, which invalidated the treaty. Harsher terms were agreed upon, and King John II was released to raise his ransom, with other hostages taking his place. One replacement hostage, John's son, managed to escape. The dishonor of having a surrogate prisoner escape led John to return to England of his own free will. He died in London in 1364. Despite this, the ransom was paid. Aquitaine reverted to the English, and Edward III renounced his claim to the French throne. King John II created a new currency called the franc cheval to try and stabilize the French economy. Aquitaine was given to Edward the Black Prince, and for 9 years, Edward III did not hold the dual title of King of England and France. Meanwhile, back in France, John's son Charles succeeded him, becoming King Charles V. He had a monumental task on his hands of restoring order and stability in France. Luckily, he was up to the task and earned himself the moniker Charles the Wise. He appointed the brilliant military leader Bertrand de Guesclin as Constable of France, and together they were able to claw back most of Aquitaine from the English. However, Charles V could not expel the English entirely before dying in 1380. Both sides were war-weary, and for 2 decades the fighting was aimless and punctuated by peace. The Black Prince had perished in 1376, and King Edward III had passed away the following year. The heir to the throne of England was 10-year-old Richard II, and 3 years later, the throne of France went to 11-year-old Charles VI. The war was almost forgotten as England suffered from the aftermath of the Black Plague, and Charles VI's uncles were too busy vying for power to worry about the English. Later in their reigns, the two kings negotiated directly with each other, with Richard marrying Charles's 7-year-old daughter in 1396, uniting the warring countries. The two kings agreed on a 28-year extension for the existing truce, and while a complete peace treaty could not be decided on, the two kingdoms appeared to be on the path to an accord. Unfortunately, many in England did not share Richard's wish for peace. In 1399, he was deposed and died in prison in 1400. Henry Bolingbroke was crowned King Henry IV on September 30, 1399. Henry undid any hopes for peace by reasserting the claim on the French throne. In France, Charles VI had become prone to fits of madness, at one point believing himself to be made of glass. Charles's brother, Louis of Orleans, was enlisted to help the current king rule. Louis renewed France's support for Scotland, aiding the Welsh rebellion, and began reconquering Aquitaine. However, This course of action was short-lived as France fell into civil war in 1407, after the Duke of Burgundy, John the Fearless, had Louis assassinated. France was divided between the Burgundians and the Armagnacs, who both appealed to Henry IV for help. Henry aided John the Fearless, although in 1412 the Armagnacs offered Henry the restitution of Aquitaine if he sided with them. However, Henry died in March of 1413 and was succeeded by his son, Henry V. Taking advantage of the Civil War, Henry V sailed to Normandy on August 10, 1415. He marched across France to Agincourt, where he met the French army. The battle, fought on St. Crispin's Day, October 25, 1415, was later immortalized by William Shakespeare in his play Henry V. Despite being outnumbered by the French, Henry prevailed. The victory was largely due to the employment of the English longbow, which caused heavy casualties for the French from a long distance. Agincourt was a remarkable success for Henry V, and in 1417 he started a new campaign, taking Normandy by January 1419. Seeing how close the English were to Paris, the French factions agreed to meet. The meeting was a disaster, as the Armagnacs saw it as an opportunity to avenge the assassination of Louis of Orleans and killed John the Fearless, which caused John's heir, Philip, to join with Henry V. Philip then brokered a deal with Henry on King Charles's behalf. This deal disinherited Charles's son, the Dauphin, in favor of Henry V, who would marry Charles's daughter, Catherine of Valois, and gain the dual monarchy of France and England. Charles VI would still hold the throne of France, but due to his condition, it was agreed that Henry V would act as regent while he lived. The Treaty of Troyes was formalized in 1420, but Henry V died in August 1422. When Charles VI followed him 2 months later, Henry's 9-month-old son became King Henry VI of England and France. France was split in two. While Henry VI was widely accepted as king in northern France, in the south, the Armagnacs upheld the succession of the Dauphin, 19-year-old Charles VII. Henry VI's uncle, John, Duke of Bedford, was entrusted with unifying France under Henry VI. By 1427, John had secured the north of France enough to advance southward and invaded the Loire Valley, besieging Orleans in 1428. Things looked dire for the Dauphin and his followers, but an unlikely player was about to enter the stage. In February 1429, a peasant girl from Domremy entered the court of Charles VII, telling him she heard voices giving her the mission of expelling the English from France. In May, not having any better ideas, Charles VII let this confident 17-year-old girl accompany a small relief force to Orleans. Joan of Arc was able to revive the confidence of Charles VII's army, and the troops broke the siege. Twice in June, the armies she rode with defeated the English, causing them to retreat further. And on July 17th, she witnessed Charles VII be officially crowned King of France. On May 23, 1430, Joan was captured by the Duke of Burgundy while retreating from Compiègne. Charles, who was negotiating a truce with the Duke, left her to her fate and made no attempt to save her. On January 3, 1431, Joan was handed over to the English-supporting Bishop of Beauvais for 10,000 francs. Although she had fought against the English, it was the Church that put her on trial, as her claims that she communicated directly with God threatened their hierarchy. Her prosecution may have also served to discredit Charles VII by casting Joan as a heretic and a liar. The charges leveled against her were based on her prophesizing the future, being assured of salvation, wearing men's clothing, and believing she was hearing the direct commands of God. After signing an abjuration renouncing her past actions, she donned women's clothing and was sentenced to a life of imprisonment. However, a few days later, she returned to wearing men's clothing and told officials that St. Catherine of Alexandria and St. Margaret of Antioch had reprimanded her for signing the abjuration. The judges saw this as a relapse into heresy, and on May 30, 1431, she was burned alive. After Joan's execution, the English won back some of the towns they had lost, but Joan's legacy persevered. In 1435, the Duke of Burgundy defected from the English and recognized the sovereignty of Charles VII. The fighting and negotiations continued until 1444, when a truce was signed, and it was agreed that Margaret of Anjou would marry Henry VI. After this truce, Henry VI still retained control of Calais, Maine, Bordelais, and most of Normandy. The truce was honored until 1449, when English troops sacked Forgiers in Brittany, and Charles VII declared that this action meant the treaty no longer bound him. Charles had spent the last 5 years reorganizing his army, and his forces quickly took Normandy in 1449–1450 and Gascony in 1451. By 1453, the English had lost all territories in France except Calais, and the war was officially over. But it would be another 348 years before the English kings would relinquish the title of King of France. To learn more about the 100 Years' War, check out our book, The 100 Years' War, a captivating guide to the conflicts between the English House of Plantagenet and the French House of Valois that took place during the Middle Ages. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free mythology bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.